The desert wind whipped across the training ground as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos lined up her shot. The target stood 800 meters away, a distance that would challenge even the most seasoned marksman. But Maria wasn't just any soldier. She had something to prove, something that burned deeper than the scorching Afghan sun overhead. Just 6 months earlier, she had been told she wasn't suited for advanced sniper training. Today, 20 Marines owed their lives to the very skills those instructors had deemed inadequate. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria's journey began not in the military, but in the rural mountains of Colorado, where her grandfather, a World War II veteran, taught her to hunt. Every weekend, they would trek through the wilderness, and he would share stories of precision, patience, and the weight of responsibility that came with every trigger pull. A true marksman, he would say, adjusting her grip on the rifle, doesn't just hit the target. They understand the consequence of every shot they don't take. By age 16, Maria could place a bullet through a quarter at 200 yards. Her natural talent was undeniable, but more importantly, she possessed something that couldn't be taught, an intuitive understanding of wind patterns, bullet drop, and the subtle art of reading terrain. Her grandfather recognized this gift and encouraged her to consider a military career. The service could use someone like you, he told her on her 18th birthday, presenting her with his own service rifle from the war. When Maria enlisted in the Marines, she excelled in basic training. Her marksmanship scores were consistently perfect, and her instructors noted her exceptional composure under pressure. She volunteered for every advanced course, every specialized training opportunity. But when she applied for the elite sniper school, she hit a wall that seemed insurmountable. The rejection letter was brief and clinical. After careful consideration, we have determined that you do not meet the physical and psychological requirements for advanced sniper training. No specific reasons were given, no areas for improvement outlined, just a flat rejection that stung deeper than any physical wound she had ever endured. Maria's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, called her into his office the day after the rejection. He was a fair man, respected throughout the unit, but even he seemed uncomfortable with the decision. "Santos, I want you to know this doesn't reflect your abilities," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Sometimes these decisions are made based on factors beyond our control." The unspoken reality hung heavy in the air. Maria knew, as did everyone else, that the sniper program had never graduated a woman. The official reasons varied: physical requirements, psychological assessments, unit cohesion concerns, but the result was always the same. Women could serve in combat roles, could prove themselves in firefights and dangerous missions, but the elite sniper program remained an old boys' club, protected by tradition and unwritten rules. Determined not to let the rejection define her career, Maria threw herself into every other aspect of her training. She volunteered for the most dangerous patrols, earned her jump wings, and completed advanced urban warfare courses. Her fellow Marines respected her skills and trusted her in combat, but she could never shake the feeling that she was being held back from her true calling. During her second deployment to Afghanistan, Maria was assigned to Forward Operating Base Chapman, a remote outpost in Khost Province. The base served as a critical supply hub and launching point for operations against Taliban forces in the region. It was here that Maria's exceptional marksmanship skills would finally be put to their ultimate test. The base housed approximately 200 personnel from various units: Marines, Army soldiers, Air Force personnel, and civilian contractors. Among them was Alpha Squad, a 20-man Marine reconnaissance unit led by Gunnery Sergeant David Kim. Alpha Squad had earned the reputation for taking on the most dangerous missions, often operating behind enemy lines for days at a time. Maria had worked with Alpha Squad on several occasions, providing overwatch during their operations. Gunny Kim had noticed her exceptional shooting abilities and had quietly advocated for her inclusion in more specialized roles. "That woman can put a bullet exactly where she wants it," he told his squad leaders. The relationship between Maria and Alpha Squad deepened over months of shared missions and mutual respect. These Marines had seen her in action, watched her make impossible shots under pressure, and witnessed her unwavering composure in the face of enemy fire. To them, her gender was irrelevant. What mattered was her ability to keep them alive. Corporal Jake Thompson, Alpha Squad's communications specialist, had been saved by Maria's precision shooting during an ambush 3 months earlier. A Taliban fighter had Thompson pinned down behind inadequate cover, and conventional suppressing fire wasn't effective due to the civilian buildings nearby. Maria, positioned 400 meters away, had identified the threat and neutralized it with a single, carefully placed shot that eliminated the enemy without endangering any civilians. "She's the best shooter I've ever seen," Thompson told his buddies back at base. "I don't understand why she's not in sniper school. Politics, I guess." The politics of military advancement were indeed complex, particularly for women in combat roles. Despite official policy changes that opened combat positions to qualified women, implementation remained uneven across different units and specialties. The sniper community, with its emphasis on physical endurance, psychological resilience, and unit cohesion, had been particularly resistant to change. Colonel Sarah Bradley, one of the few women to achieve senior rank in combat arms, had fought these battles throughout her career. She understood the challenges Maria faced better than most. "The institution will change," she told Maria during a visit to FOB Chapman, "but it happens one precedent at a time, one exceptional performance at a time." Maria took those words to heart, using each mission as an opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities. She studied ballistics manuals in her spare time, practiced breathing techniques, and maintained her equipment with obsessive attention to detail. Her rifle, a standard-issue M4A5, had been modified with a custom stock and high-end optics that she had purchased with her own money. The weapon had become an extension of herself, familiar as her own heartbeat. She knew exactly how it would perform at different ranges, in different weather conditions, and with different ammunition loads. This intimate knowledge of her equipment would prove crucial in the days to come. Intelligence reports in early November indicated increased Taliban activity in the region surrounding FOB Chapman. Intercepted communications suggested that enemy forces were planning a major offensive against coalition positions, with Chapman identified as a primary target. The base's strategic location made it valuable to both sides. Control of the area would provide significant tactical advantages for future operations. In response to the threat, base commanders implemented heightened security measures and adjusted patrol schedules. Alpha Squad was tasked with conducting long-range reconnaissance missions to identify enemy positions and movement patterns. These missions typically lasted 48 to 72 hours and required the squad to operate with minimal support, relying on stealth and careful planning to avoid detection. Maria volunteered to provide overwatch for these missions, positioning herself at strategic locations where she could observe the squad's route and provide supporting fire if needed. Her role was officially listed as designated marksman, but in practice she functioned as a sniper, using her exceptional skills to protect her fellow Marines. The night of November 12th started like many others. Alpha Squad departed the base at 0200 hours, moving under cover of darkness toward their objective, a suspected Taliban staging area approximately 15 kilometers northeast of Chapman. Intelligence suggested that enemy forces were using the location to stockpile weapons and plan attacks against coalition forces. Maria had positioned herself on a ridgeline 2 kilometers from the squad's planned route, providing excellent observation of the surrounding terrain. Her position offered clear fields of fire across multiple approach routes and allowed her to cover the squad's movement without being detected. She settled in for what she expected to be a routine Overwatch mission. The first few hours passed without incident. Alpha Squad moved methodically through the darkness, using night vision equipment and careful navigation to avoid detection. Their progress was steady, and radio communications indicated they were on schedule to reach their objective before dawn. As the sun began to rise over the mountains, Maria scanned the surrounding area through her scope, looking for any signs of enemy activity. The landscape appeared peaceful. Too peaceful, she realized with growing unease. In her experience, abnormal quiet often preceded violent action. At 6:30 hours, Alpha Squad reached their observation point overlooking the suspected Taliban position.
What they found exceeded their worst expectations. Instead of a small staging area, they discovered a major enemy compound housing an estimated 200 to 300 Taliban fighters. Worse, the enemy had clearly been expecting them.
The ambush erupted with devastating suddenness. Taliban fighters had positioned themselves in a horseshoe formation around Alpha Squad's observation point, creating a deadly crossfire that pinned the Marines down in a shallow depression with minimal cover. Automatic weapons fire raked their position from 3 sides, while rocket-propelled grenades exploded around them, showering the area with deadly fragments. Gunny Kim's voice crackled over the radio, barely audible above the sound of gunfire. Overwatch, this is Alpha 1. We are taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Request immediate support. Maria's training kicked in automatically. She had drilled for this scenario countless times, but the reality was more chaotic and terrifying than any exercise. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes from at least a dozen enemy positions, with more Taliban fighters moving to reinforce the ambush. The Marines were outnumbered more than 10 to 1, trapped in the kill zone with nowhere to run. Her first priority was identifying the most immediate threats. 2 machine gun positions on elevated ground were pouring devastating fire into the Marines' position, making it impossible for them to move or return effective fire. These had to be eliminated first. The first machine gun nest was positioned 650 meters from Maria's location, partially concealed behind a low stone wall. The gunner was barely visible, showing only his head and shoulders above the barrier. Maria adjusted her scope for distance and wind, took a deep breath, and squeezed the trigger. The Taliban fighter dropped instantly, but within seconds, another fighter had taken his place at the weapon. Maria worked methodically, eliminating threats in order of priority. Her second shot took out a sniper who had been targeting the Marines from a rooftop 800 meters away. The third neutralized an RPG team that was maneuvering for a better firing position. Each shot was deliberate, precise, and deadly effective. But even with Maria's support, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The Taliban had numerical superiority and better positions, while Alpha Squad was running low on ammunition and had already suffered casualties. Corporal Martinez had taken shrapnel in his leg and couldn't move effectively. Private Johnson was unconscious from a concussion caused by a near miss from an RPG. Overwatch, we need immediate extraction, Kim radioed. We have 2 wounded and are running low on ammo. Can you mark an LZ? Maria scanned the surrounding terrain through her scope, looking for a suitable landing zone for a rescue helicopter. The nearest flat ground was 400 meters from Alpha Squad's position, across open terrain that was covered by multiple enemy firing positions. Any attempt to reach it would be suicide under current conditions. The Taliban fighters seemed to understand this as well. Marie could see them repositioning to block the most likely escape routes, setting up additional machine gun positions and bringing up more heavy weapons. They intended to finish off Alpha Squad and claim a significant propaganda victory. It was then that Maria made a decision that would define her entire military career. Instead of continuing to provide support from her current position, she decided to move closer to the action where she could be more effective in breaking up the enemy positions. Leaving her concealed position meant abandoning the safety of distance and putting herself at much greater risk. But it also meant she could engage targets that were hidden from her current angle and potentially create enough chaos to allow Alpha Squad to escape. Maria gathered her equipment and began moving toward the battle, using the terrain to mask her approach. She moved in short bounds, covering perhaps 50 meters at a time before stopping to assess the situation and plan her next move. It was dangerous work. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and she could find herself surrounded by enemy fighters. As she moved closer, the sounds of battle became overwhelming. The crack of rifle fire mixed with the deeper roar of machine guns and the explosive reports of RPGs. She could hear shouting in both English and Dari, the local language, as both sides maneuvered for advantage. From her new position, just 300 meters from the ambush site, Maria had a much clearer view of the enemy positions. She could see individual Taliban fighters moving between cover points, carrying ammunition and positioning weapons. More importantly, she could identify the key leaders who were coordinating the attack. Taking out enemy leadership was a fundamental principle of military tactics, and Maria recognized several fighters who appeared to be giving orders and directing the movements of others. These would be her priority targets. Eliminating them might disrupt the Taliban's coordination and give Alpha Squad the opening they needed. Her fourth shot of the engagement took out what appeared to be a Taliban commander who had been directing fighters from a central position. The man's death caused immediate confusion among the nearby fighters, who began looking around frantically for the source of the shot. The fifth shot eliminated a machine gunner who had been particularly effective at keeping the Marines pinned down. This gave Alpha Squad the opportunity to return more effective fire and begin treating their wounded. But Maria's new position also made her more vulnerable to detection. Taliban fighters were beginning to realize that they were being engaged by a sniper, and they were actively searching for her location. Several times she had to relocate quickly as enemy fire began impacting near her position. The battle was reaching a critical point. Alpha Squad had managed to stabilize their situation temporarily, but they were still surrounded and outnumbered. The Taliban were bringing up reinforcements, including what appeared to be a mortar team that could devastate the Marines' position once it was properly positioned. Maria realized that conventional tactics weren't going to be sufficient. If Alpha Squad was going to survive, she would need to do something extraordinary, something that would require every skill she had developed over years of training and combat experience. She was about to attempt the most challenging shooting sequence of her entire military career. A series of precision shots that would push the boundaries of what was considered possible in combat conditions.
The mortar team was setting up 900 meters from Maria's position, partially hidden behind a cluster of mud brick buildings that provided excellent concealment. She could see 3 Taliban fighters working methodically to position their weapon, a Soviet-era 82mm mortar that could rain devastation on Alpha Squad's position once properly sighted. The mathematics of the situation were grim. If that mortar became operational, the 20 Marines trapped in the kill zone would have perhaps 30 seconds before the first rounds began falling. Maria's grandfather had taught her that the mark of a true marksman wasn't just accuracy. It was the ability to make impossible shots when lives hung in the balance. Sometimes, he had said during one of their hunting trips, you only get one chance to do the right thing. That's when character reveals itself. She steadied her breathing and began calculating the shot. 900 meters in mountainous terrain with crosswinds gusting up to 15 miles per hour. The target was partially concealed, with only the mortar operator's upper torso visible above the building's low wall. The margin for error was essentially 0. Miss, and her position would be compromised, leaving Alpha Squad without their only hope of rescue. Through her scope, she could see the mortar team's leader giving instructions to his subordinates. He was an older man, clearly experienced, who moved with the confidence of someone who had used these weapons before. His calm demeanor suggested he understood exactly how devastating his weapon would be against the trapped Marines. The crosswind was the biggest challenge. At this distance, even a slight miscalculation would send the bullet wide of its target. Maria watched the vegetation around the enemy position, noting how the bushes and grass moved in the wind. She could feel the breeze on her own face, but wind conditions could vary significantly across the distance to her target. She made minute adjustments to her scope, compensating for the wind and the steep downward angle of the shot. The mortar operator had stopped moving, focusing intently on his weapons sight. This was her moment, perhaps her only chance to eliminate the threat before it became operational. Maria's finger tightened on the trigger. The familiar sensation of the firing pin striking the primer was followed immediately by the rifle's recoil against her shoulder. Through her scope, she watched the bullet's impact, a direct hit that eliminated the mortar operator instantly. But the weapon was still dangerous. The other two Taliban fighters immediately moved to the mortar, attempting to take over its operation. Maria had perhaps 15 seconds before one of them figured out the sight picture and began dropping rounds on Alpha Squad. Her second shot took out the fighter who had reached the mortar first. The third Taliban fighter, realizing he was being targeted by a sniper, attempted to take cover behind the weapon itself. It was a tactical error that proved fatal. Maria's next shot found him despite his concealment. "Overwatch, this is Alpha 1, Kim's voice crackled over the radio. "We saw the impacts on that mortar position. Outstanding shooting. We're going to attempt to move to better cover." But even with the mortar threat eliminated, Alpha Squad remained in desperate circumstances. Taliban fighters were continuing to arrive at the scene, and several machine gun positions still had the Marines pinned down. Maria could see at least 8 separate enemy firing positions, each manned by multiple fighters. The tactical situation required a different approach. Rather than picking off individual targets, Maria needed to create enough chaos and confusion to allow Alpha Squad to break contact and move to a more defensible position. This meant rapid, successive shots against multiple targets, prioritizing those that posed the most immediate threat to the Marines' movement. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Maria identified her next series of targets, 3 machine gun positions that formed overlapping fields of fire across the route Alpha Squad would need to take to reach better cover. These positions were located at ranges between 400 and 700 meters, requiring rapid adjustments to her scope between shots. The first machine gun was positioned behind a low stone wall, with the gunner clearly visible through her scope. Maria's shot took him down, but immediately another Taliban fighter moved to take his place at the weapon. Her follow-up shot eliminated this replacement before he could begin firing. The second machine gun position was more challenging. The weapon was positioned in a window of a 2-story building, with only the barrel and a small portion of the gunner's face visible. Maria adjusted her point of aim and fired, watching through her scope as the Taliban fighter slumped forward over his weapon. The third position required the most difficult shot of the sequence. The machine gun was positioned behind a pile of rubble, with the gunner using a small gap between concrete blocks as a firing port. Maria could see only a portion of the man's shoulder and part of his face. The target area was perhaps 6 inches squared at a distance of 650 meters. She took extra time with this shot, accounting for the wind and the precise angle required to thread the bullet through the narrow opening. When she fired, the result was immediate. The machine gun fell silent, and she could see the other Taliban fighters in the area beginning to show signs of panic. The psychological impact of accurate sniper fire on enemy forces was well documented in military literature. The knowledge that a skilled marksman was operating in the area created fear and hesitation that could be tactically exploited. Maria could see this effect beginning to manifest among the Taliban fighters, who were now moving more cautiously and showing reluctance to expose themselves. Alpha Squad was making progress toward better cover, but their movement was painfully slow due to their wounded and the need to maintain security during the withdrawal. Corporal Martinez was being carried by 2 of his squad mates, while Private Johnson, though conscious now, was still disoriented from his concussion and required assistance. Maria could see that the Taliban fighters were beginning to reorganize despite her efforts. New leaders were emerging to replace those she had eliminated, and reinforcements continued to arrive. More concerning, she spotted what appeared to be a heavy machine gun being moved into position, a weapon that could devastate Alpha Squad even in their new position. The heavy machine gun was being positioned on the flat roof of a 3-story building, approximately 550 meters from both Maria's position and Alpha Squad's route. Once operational, this weapon would command the entire area and make further movement impossible for the Marines. Maria watched through her scope as 4 Taliban fighters struggled to maneuver the heavy weapon up the building's external staircase. The gun itself, what appeared to be a Soviet-era DSHK 12.7mm machine gun, was clearly difficult to handle, requiring multiple men to position properly. She had a choice to make: engage the gun crew while they were still moving the weapon, or wait until they had it set up and try to eliminate the gunner. Engaging them while they were moving the gun would be more challenging shooting, but it would prevent the weapon from ever becoming operational. Maria chose the more aggressive approach. As the Taliban fighters reached the rooftop and began setting up the machine gun, she began engaging them in rapid succession. Her first shot eliminated the fighter who appeared to be directing the weapon's placement. The second took out the man who was attempting to load the ammunition belt. The remaining two fighters realized they were being targeted and attempted to take cover behind the weapon itself. But Maria had anticipated this response, and her third shot found one of them despite his concealment. The fourth fighter abandoned the weapon entirely and fled toward the building's staircase, where Maria's final shot in the sequence eliminated him before he could escape. With the heavy machine gun threat neutralized, Alpha Squad was able to reach a more defensible position among a cluster of large boulders that provided excellent cover from most directions. But they were still far from safety, and the Taliban forces were adapting to Maria's presence on the battlefield. Overwatch, we've reached the rocks, but we're still taking fire from multiple positions. Can you identify the biggest threats? From her elevated position, Maria had an excellent view of the entire battlefield. She could see Taliban fighters moving through the buildings and terrain features, attempting to surround Alpha Squad's new position. The enemy had clearly shifted tactics, using smaller groups and more dispersed formations to make targeting more difficult. But this tactical adjustment also created opportunities. The dispersed Taliban forces were less coordinated and more vulnerable to the psychological effects of precision sniper fire. Maria began systematically engaging the most aggressive fighters, those who were moving closest to Alpha Squad's position, or attempting to set up firing positions with clear lines of sight to the Marines. Her shooting had entered what military snipers called the zone, a state of focused concentration where technical skills, tactical awareness, and instinctive decision-making merged into fluid, effective action. Each shot flowed naturally into the next, with target selection, range estimation, and wind calculation happening almost subconsciously. Shot 31 eliminated a Taliban fighter who had been attempting to set up a rocket-propelled grenade launcher in a position that would have allowed him to engage Alpha Squad directly. Shot 32 took out a sniper who had been trying to locate Maria's position by observing her muzzle flashes. The Taliban forces were beginning to show signs of demoralization. Maria could see fighters hesitating before moving between positions, and some appeared to be withdrawing from advanced positions closer to Alpha Squad. The psychological pressure of accurate, persistent sniper fire was having its intended effect. But Maria knew that her ammunition supply was becoming a concern. She had started the mission with 100 rounds of match-grade ammunition, and she had now fired more than half of that. Each remaining shot needed to count, and she had to balance the need to suppress enemy activity with the requirement to conserve ammunition for the most critical threats. The next critical moment came when Maria spotted a group of Taliban fighters attempting to move a mortar to a new position where it could engage Alpha Squad. Unlike the first mortar team, this group was moving more carefully, using buildings and terrain features to mask their movement. The tube and base plate were being carried separately, along with several mortar rounds. When the group paused to rest in the courtyard of a partially destroyed building, Maria saw her opportunity. The fighters had clustered together, apparently feeling safe in what they believed was a concealed position. But Maria's elevated position gave her a clear view into the courtyard, and the range was a manageable 450 meters. Her first shot targeted the fighter carrying the mortar tube. Without this component, the weapon system would be useless. The shot was perfectly placed, eliminating the target and sending the other fighters scrambling for cover. Maria's follow-up shots eliminated 2 more members of the mortar crew before the survivors abandoned the weapon components and fled. The elimination of the second mortar threat significantly improved Alpha Squad's tactical situation.
With both mortar teams eliminated and several machine gun positions suppressed, the Marines had breathing room to consolidate their position and treat their wounded more thoroughly. Maria could see Corporal Martinez receiving medical attention behind the rocks, while the rest of Alpha Squad maintained security and returned fire against the remaining Taliban positions. The enemy forces appeared to be consolidating their own positions, perhaps waiting for a coordinated assault or waiting for additional reinforcements.
The lull in the fighting gave Maria an opportunity to assess the overall tactical situation and plan her next moves. Through her scope, she conducted a systematic scan of the battlefield, identifying remaining enemy positions and evaluating threats to Alpha Squad's continued survival. She counted at least 15 Taliban fighters still in position around Alpha Squad's location, though many were now more cautious about exposing themselves. Several machine gun positions remained active, though their rate of fire had decreased significantly since Maria had begun targeting their crews. More concerning was the arrival of what appeared to be a Taliban commander and his staff. Maria could see a group of 5 fighters who had taken position in a building overlooking the battlefield, and their behavior suggested they were coordinating the enemy's activities. The commander, distinguishable by his more elaborate equipment and the deference shown by other fighters, was using binoculars to observe Alpha Squad's position and was apparently issuing orders via radio. Eliminating enemy leadership was always a high-priority mission for snipers, as it could disrupt coordination and demoralize remaining forces. But this particular shot would be challenging. The target was positioned behind a window in a 2-story building approximately 750 meters away, and he was only occasionally visible as he moved within the room. Maria studied the target area carefully, noting the commander's movement patterns and timing. He appeared to be spending most of his time near the window, but he would occasionally move deeper into the room to consult with his subordinates or use his radio. She would need to time her shot for one of his appearances at the window. After observing for several minutes, Maria identified a pattern. The commander would appear at the window for approximately 10 to 15 seconds every 2 minutes, using his binoculars to observe the battlefield before retreating to give orders. She would have one chance when he next appeared. Maria prepared for the shot with extra care. The range was significant, the target exposure would be brief, and the tactical value of success was enormous. She adjusted her scope for the distance and wind conditions, then settled into her firing position and controlled her breathing. When the Taliban commander next appeared at the window, Maria was ready. Her shot was precisely timed and perfectly placed, eliminating the target instantly. The psychological impact was immediate. She could see the other Taliban fighters in the building reacting with confusion and apparent panic at their leader's sudden death. The elimination of the Taliban commander marked a turning point in the battle. Without central coordination, the enemy forces began showing less aggressive behavior and reduced coordination in their attacks against Alpha Squad. Several groups of fighters began withdrawing from advanced positions, apparently deciding that the cost of continuing the attack was too high. Maria knew that the tactical situation remained dangerous. Alpha Squad was still surrounded, still had wounded personnel, and was running low on ammunition. The Taliban forces, while demoralized, still outnumbered the Marines significantly and could renew their attack at any time. The radio crackled with Kim's voice. "Overwatch, we've got movement on the south side. Looks like they're trying to set up another firing position." Maria adjusted her observation to the south, where she could see 3 Taliban fighters attempting to position a machine gun behind a low wall approximately 400 meters from Alpha Squad. This position would give them an excellent field of fire against the Marines' defensive position. Her response was swift and decisive. 3 quick shots eliminated all 3 fighters before they could make their weapon operational.
The speed and accuracy of the engagement sent a clear message to any other Taliban fighters who might be considering similar movements. As the morning wore on, Maria continued to dominate the battlefield through precision fire and tactical awareness. She eliminated fighters who attempted to advance on Alpha Squad's position, suppressed those who tried to establish new firing positions, and maintained constant pressure on the enemy forces. Her shot count had reached 67 rounds fired, with an estimated 40-plus enemy casualties. But more importantly, she had systematically dismantled the Taliban's ability to coordinate an effective attack against Alpha Squad. Every key weapon system had been eliminated, every attempt at tactical movement had been countered, and enemy morale was clearly deteriorating. The tactical situation had shifted from a desperate defensive action to a more manageable holding operation. Alpha Squad was still surrounded, still had wounded personnel, and still needed extraction, but they were no longer in immediate danger of being overrun. Maria's precision fire had bought them time and created the conditions necessary for a successful rescue operation. At 10:30 hours, the sound of rotary wing aircraft could be heard in the distance. Two AH-64 Apache attack helicopters appeared over the mountains, followed by a CH-47 Chinook transport helicopter that would extract Alpha Squad from their precarious position. The arrival of air support marked the beginning of the end for the Taliban ambush. The Apache helicopters immediately began engaging enemy positions with 30mm cannon fire and Hellfire missiles, systematically destroying the remaining threats around Alpha Squad's position. Maria continued to provide overwatch as the Chinook helicopter approached Alpha Squad's location. Even with air support present, there remained a possibility that Taliban fighters with portable surface-to-air missiles could threaten the rescue aircraft. Her role now was to identify and eliminate any such threats before they could engage the helicopters. As the Chinook settled into a hasty landing zone near Alpha Squad's location, Maria maintained vigilant observation of the surrounding area. The extraction needed to be completed quickly to minimize the helicopter's exposure to enemy fire, and every second counted. Alpha Squad moved efficiently toward the helicopter, carrying their wounded and maintaining security during the withdrawal. The entire extraction took less than 3 minutes from landing to takeoff, but those 3 minutes required absolute precision and coordination from everyone involved. As the Chinook lifted off with Alpha Squad safely aboard, Maria felt a mixture of relief and professional satisfaction. The mission had been successful. All 20 Marines were alive and would return to base for medical treatment and debriefing. Her precision shooting had made the difference between a successful rescue and a potential massacre. But even as the helicopters disappeared over the mountains, Maria knew that her own extraction was still ahead of her. She was alone on the battlefield, surrounded by hostile forces, with limited ammunition and a long way from safety. The most challenging part of her mission was just beginning.
As the rescue helicopters disappeared into the distance, carrying Alpha Squad to safety, Maria found herself in perhaps the most dangerous position of her military career. She was alone on a mountainside, surrounded by an unknown number of hostile Taliban fighters who were undoubtedly searching for the sniper who had decimated their forces. Her ammunition was running low, she had fewer than 30 rounds remaining, and her extraction point was still 8 kilometers away through enemy-controlled territory. The immediate priority was to relocate before the Taliban could triangulate her position based on her muzzle flashes during the extended engagement. Maria had been firing from the same general area for over 2 hours, and while she had changed positions several times, experienced fighters would have been able to narrow down her location. She gathered her equipment quickly but methodically, ensuring that nothing was left behind that could provide intelligence to enemy forces. Her rifle was broken down and packed into her backpack, while her sidearm, a standard-issue M9 pistol, was kept readily accessible. The movement to her extraction point would require stealth and patience, qualities that had served her well throughout her military career.
The terrain offered both advantages and challenges for her withdrawal. The mountainous landscape provided numerous concealment opportunities, but it also channeled movement along predictable routes that could be easily watched by enemy forces. Maria would need to balance speed with security, moving quickly enough to stay ahead of any pursuit while remaining undetected. As she began her movement, Maria could hear the sounds of Taliban fighters in the valley below, their voices carrying on the thin mountain air. They were clearly agitated, shouting orders and coordinates as they attempted to organize a search for the sniper who had caused such devastation to their forces. The psychological impact of her precision shooting was evident in their voices, fear mixed with anger and determination. Maria's route took her along a series of ridgelines that offered good observation of the surrounding terrain while providing concealment from observers below. She moved in short bounds, covering perhaps 200 meters at a time before stopping to observe and listen for signs of enemy activity. During one of these observation halts, Maria spotted a group of 6 Taliban fighters moving along a trail approximately 500 meters below her position. They were clearly searching for her, moving in a tactical formation with weapons ready and frequent stops to scan the surrounding terrain. More concerningly, they appeared to be moving toward her planned route to the extraction point. The tactical situation required careful consideration. Maria could engage the search party from her current position, but doing so would reveal her location and likely draw additional enemy forces to the area. Alternatively, she could attempt to bypass them, but that would require a significant detour through unfamiliar terrain. She chose a third option, shadowing the search party from a distance to monitor their movements while continuing toward her extraction point. This approach would allow her to maintain awareness of the threat while avoiding unnecessary engagement that would compromise her position. For the next hour, Maria paralleled the Taliban search party's movement, maintaining visual contact while staying far enough away to avoid detection. The enemy fighters were systematic in their search, checking likely hiding places and maintaining communication with other groups via radio. Their professionalism suggested they were experienced fighters who understood counter-sniper tactics. The radio communications Maria overheard indicated that multiple search parties were operating in the area, all coordinating their efforts to locate and eliminate the sniper who had caused such damage to their forces. The Taliban clearly understood the threat that a skilled marksman posed to their operations and were dedicating significant resources to neutralizing that threat. As Maria continued her movement toward the extraction point, she encountered increasingly challenging terrain. The mountains were steep and rocky, with loose scree that could easily give away her position if not navigated carefully. The altitude was also becoming a factor. At over 8,000 feet above sea level, the thin air made physical exertion more demanding. Despite these challenges, Maria's physical conditioning served her well. Years of military training had prepared her for exactly this type of operation, and her experience in mountainous terrain gave her confidence in her ability to navigate the difficult landscape. More importantly, her mental preparation allowed her to maintain focus and discipline despite the stress of operating alone in hostile territory. The extraction point was located in a valley approximately 2 kilometers from the Pakistani border in an area that was nominally under coalition control but frequently contested by Taliban forces. A special operations team would meet her there at a predetermined time, but reaching that location required crossing several more kilometers of dangerous terrain. As Maria approached the halfway point in her withdrawal, she encountered her most serious challenge yet. A Taliban checkpoint had been established along the main trail leading toward her extraction point, manned by approximately 8 fighters with heavy weapons. The checkpoint was positioned in a narrow valley where bypassing it would require a significant detour over extremely difficult terrain. Maria studied the checkpoint through her binoculars, analyzing the enemy positions and identifying potential weaknesses. The Taliban fighters had positioned themselves well with interlocking fields of fire and good observation of the surrounding area. But they had also made a critical error. They were focused primarily on the trail itself, with limited observation of the high ground to the north. The The northern approach would require a steep climb over rocky terrain, but it would allow Maria to bypass the checkpoint entirely without being detected. The route was physically demanding and would add several hours to her journey, but it offered the best chance of avoiding contact with enemy forces. Maria began the arduous climb, using her hands as much as her feet to navigate the steep, rocky slope. The physical effort was exhausting, but her adrenaline and determination drove her forward. Every step took her closer to safety and further from the Taliban forces that were hunting her. As she climbed, Maria reflected on the morning's events and their potential implications for her military career. She had demonstrated capabilities that clearly exceeded the standards supposedly required for advanced sniper training, and she had done so under the most demanding conditions imaginable. The official records would show that she had eliminated more than 40 enemy combatants and saved the lives of 20 Marines through precision shooting. But Maria knew that institutional change in the military happened slowly, often requiring repeated demonstrations of capability before outdated policies were modified. Her performance in this engagement would undoubtedly be recognized and documented, but whether it would lead to broader opportunities for women in specialized roles remained to be seen.
The climb over the northern ridge took Maria nearly 3 hours, but it successfully allowed her to bypass the Taliban checkpoint without detection. As she descended into the next valley, she could see her extraction point in the distance, a small clearing surrounded by rocky outcroppings that would provide excellent security for the pickup operation. But with still 2 kilometers to cover, Maria faced one final challenge. Intelligence reports had indicated that Taliban forces frequently patrolled this area, and she could see evidence of recent activity, footprints in the soft soil, and the remains of cooking fires that suggested enemy forces had camped here within the last day or two. Maria's approach to the extraction point required careful planning and execution. She needed to arrive at the predetermined time. Too early would mean waiting in potentially hostile territory, while arriving late could result in missing the pickup entirely. Military extraction operations operated on precise schedules, and delays could have fatal consequences. She positioned herself on a ridge overlooking the extraction site and began a systematic observation of the area. Through her scope, she carefully examined every potential hiding place, every likely approach route, and every position that could offer concealment to enemy forces. The clearing appeared empty, but Maria's experience had taught her to be suspicious of appearances. After 30 minutes of observation, Maria was satisfied that the immediate area was clear of enemy forces. She began her final approach to the extraction point, moving carefully through the rocky terrain while maintaining constant vigilance for signs of Taliban activity. The extraction point was a natural clearing approximately 100 meters in diameter, surrounded by large boulders and scattered trees that would provide concealment for both Maria and the extraction team. A small stream ran through one side of the clearing, providing fresh water and masking sound that could help conceal the approach of the extraction helicopter. Maria reached the extraction point 20 minutes before the scheduled pickup time. She used this interval to establish a defensive position among the rocks where she could observe all approaches to the clearing while remaining concealed from enemy observation. Her remaining ammunition was distributed for maximum effectiveness. She had 23 rifle rounds and 2 full magazines for her sidearm. At exactly 1400 hours, Maria heard the distinctive sound of rotary wing aircraft approaching from the south. 2 helicopters appeared over the mountains, a UH-60 Black Hawk for the extraction and an AH-64 Apache providing security overwatch. The sight of friendly aircraft filled Maria with relief, but she maintained her vigilance until the extraction was complete. The Black Hawk settled into the clearing with practiced precision, its crew chief scanning the surrounding terrain for threats while the aircraft remained at flight idle. Maria emerged from her concealment and moved quickly toward the helicopter, maintaining tactical awareness even as salvation approached. As she climbed aboard the Black Hawk, she was greeted by Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the team leader for the extraction operation. Rodriguez had to shout over the noise of the rotors, but his message was clear. "Outstanding work out there, Santos. Alpha Squad sends their thanks." The flight back to FOB Chapman took 40 minutes, during which Maria finally allowed herself to decompress from the intense stress of the previous 12 hours.
The adrenaline that had sustained her through the extended engagement was beginning to fade, replaced by the exhaustion that inevitably followed combat operations. But even as her body relaxed, her mind remained active, processing the events of the morning and their potential implications. She had proven beyond any doubt that she possessed the skills necessary for advanced sniper operations, and she had done so under conditions that would challenge even the most experienced operators. The helicopter landed at Chapman as the sun was beginning to set over the mountains. Maria was immediately escorted to the base medical facility for a routine post-mission examination, then to the intelligence section for a detailed debriefing of her observations and actions during the engagement. The debriefing was conducted by Major Patricia Wells, the base intelligence officer, along with Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, Maria's commanding officer. Both officers were clearly impressed by the scope and precision of Maria's performance during the rescue operation. Mitchell, I want you to walk us through your engagement sequence. Major Wells began. Our preliminary battle damage assessment suggests you eliminated more than 40 enemy combatants during a 4-hour period. That's an exceptional performance by any standard. Maria provided a detailed account of her actions, describing each significant engagement and explaining her tactical decision-making process. She discussed her target selection criteria, her ammunition management, and her movement techniques during the withdrawal phase of the operation. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell took careful notes throughout the debriefing, occasionally asking for clarification on specific points. His questions focused particularly on Maria's long-range shooting, the 800 and 900-meter engagements that had eliminated the mortar teams and machine gun positions. Santos, these long-range shots you made, what kind of training prepared you for that level of precision? Mitchell asked. Maria explained her background, from her grandfather's instruction through her self-directed study of ballistics and marksmanship techniques. She described the modifications she had made to her rifle and the hours of practice she had invested in developing her skills. Major Wells made a note in her file. We're going to be recommending you for commendation based on this action. 20 Marines are alive today because of your performance out there. But Maria sensed there was more to the conversation than simple recognition for her actions. Both officers seemed to be building towards something more significant, and their questions suggested they were documenting her capabilities for purposes beyond a routine commendation.
3 days after the rescue operation, Maria was summoned to a meeting that would change the trajectory of her military career. The conference room at FOB Chapman contained an unusual collection of personnel: her immediate chain of command, representatives from higher headquarters, and several officers she didn't recognize, but whose bearing suggested special operations backgrounds. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell opened the meeting with a summary of Maria's performance during the Alpha Squad rescue. He provided detailed statistics that even Maria found impressive when presented formally. 67 rounds fired, 43 confirmed enemy casualties, 0 friendly casualties, and a successful rescue operation against overwhelming odds. Staff Sergeant Santos, Mitchell continued, your performance 3 days ago has generated significant interest at levels well above this command. We have representatives here from multiple organizations who would like to discuss your future with you. Colonel Sarah Bradley, whom Maria recognized from her previous visit to Chapman, stood to address the group. Santos, let me be direct. What you accomplished during that engagement exceeded the performance standards we expect from our most elite snipers. The precision, tactical awareness, and sustained performance under extreme stress demonstrated skills that simply cannot be ignored. Colonel Bradley paused to let her words sink in before continuing. The Marine Corps has been forced to reevaluate its policies regarding women in specialized roles. Your performance provides compelling evidence that gender is not a reliable predictor of success in sniper operations. Maria listened intently as Colonel Bradley outlined the broader implications of her actions. The rescue of Alpha Squad had been documented through multiple sources: radio transcripts, aerial reconnaissance footage, and testimony from the rescued Marines themselves. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. We're prepared to offer you immediate enrollment in Scout Sniper School, Colonel Bradley announced. Furthermore, we're recommending you for advanced training programs that were previously unavailable to you based on outdated policy restrictions. The offer was everything Maria had dreamed of since joining the Marines, but she found herself thinking about the broader implications rather than her personal advancement. If she succeeded in these programs, she would be opening doors for other women who faced similar barriers. Major Jonathan Hayes, one of the officers Maria didn't recognize, introduced himself as a representative from Marine Corps Special Operations Command. "Santos, your performance has also attracted attention from the Special Operations community. We'd like to discuss opportunities that would utilize your demonstrated capabilities in high-priority missions." The conversation continued for over an hour, with various officers describing training opportunities, career paths, and the potential impact of Maria's success on military policy. But underlying all of these discussions was a recognition of something more fundamental. Maria had proven that institutional barriers based on gender assumptions were both artificial and counterproductive. Gunnery Sergeant Kim, who had flown in from Bagram Air Base specifically for this meeting, provided the most compelling testimony. "Ma'am, I've served with some outstanding Marines over 15 years in this Corps. Staff Sergeant Santos saved my life and the lives of 19 other Marines through skill, courage, and determination that I've never seen equaled. Anyone who thinks women can't perform in combat roles needs to explain how she did what she did out there." The meeting concluded with Maria accepting the offer to attend Scout Sniper School, along with a commitment to participate in an advanced marksmanship instructor course that would qualify her to train other Marines. But perhaps more importantly, she agreed to serve as a case study for policy reform efforts aimed at eliminating artificial barriers to military specialties. Over the following weeks, Maria's story began to spread throughout the military community. The rescue of Alpha Squad became a case study taught in advanced tactics courses, and Maria herself became a symbol of the changing role of women in combat operations. The media attention was both welcome and challenging. Maria understood the importance of visibility for policy reform, but she preferred to let her performance speak for itself rather than becoming a spokesperson for women's rights in the military. Her focus remained on developing her skills and serving effectively in whatever role she was assigned. When Maria finally departed FOB Chapman for Scout Sniper School, she carried with her not just personal achievement, but the hopes and expectations of countless other women who aspired to serve in roles that had previously been denied to them. The pressure was significant, but it was also motivating. The Scout Sniper School that had once rejected Maria's application now welcomed her as a student whose demonstrated capabilities exceeded those of most graduates. Her instructors, many of whom had initially been skeptical about training women for sniper roles, found their assumptions challenged by her consistent high performance. Maria graduated first in her class, setting new records in several categories, including long-range precision and target identification. But more importantly, her success paved the way for other qualified women to enter the program. Within 2 years, the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School had graduated its first female Marine, followed by several others who met the rigorous standards. The institutional changes that followed Maria's breakthrough were gradual but significant. Training standards were revised to focus on demonstrable capabilities rather than assumptions about gender-based limitations. Physical requirements were maintained at high levels, but they were applied equally and fairly to all candidates, regardless of gender. Maria's influence extended beyond the sniper community. Her story became part of the broader conversation about women in combat roles, contributing to policy discussions at the highest levels of military leadership. The evidence of her performance was simply too compelling to ignore, and it helped accelerate changes that might otherwise have taken decades to implement.
5 years after the Alpha Squad rescue, Maria found herself in a role she never could have imagined when she first applied to Scout Sniper School. As the first female chief instructor at the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School, she was responsible for training the next generation of precision marksmen and setting standards that would define the program for years to come. The school had changed dramatically since her initial rejection. The student body now included both men and women, all held to the same exacting standards that had always defined the program. Physical requirements remained demanding, technical standards were uncompromising, and the psychological pressure was intense. But the artificial barriers that had once excluded qualified candidates based on gender had been eliminated. Maria's office walls displayed the commendations and awards she had received over the years. the Silver Star for her actions during the Alpha Squad rescue, the Distinguished Service Medal for her contributions to military policy reform, and numerous other recognitions for her service and achievements. But the display that meant the most to her was a photograph of the 20 Marines from Alpha Squad, all of whom had survived their injuries and continued their military careers. Gunnery Sergeant Kim, now a Master Sergeant, had visited the school the previous month to speak to a new class of students. His message was simple but powerful. The person who saved my life and the lives of my Marines was denied the opportunity to attend this school because of outdated policies and incorrect assumptions. Don't let artificial barriers prevent you from recognizing and developing talent wherever you find it. The students in Maria's current class included 8 women among the 36 candidates who had been selected for training. The women face the same challenges as their male counterparts: grueling physical training, complex technical instruction, and psychological pressure designed to identify those with the mental toughness required for sniper operations. Maria's approach to instruction emphasized practical skills and realistic training scenarios. Students spent extensive time on live fire ranges, practiced stalking techniques in challenging terrain, and participated in complex exercises that replicated the stress and uncertainty of combat operations. One of her current students, Lance Corporal Jennifer Martinez, reminded Maria of herself at that age: technically proficient, highly motivated, and facing skepticism from some of her peers about her place in the program. Maria made sure to provide extra mentorship to Martinez and the other women in the class, helping them navigate challenges that went beyond the standard curriculum. The standards here are absolute, Maria told her students during a classroom session on advanced ballistics. They don't change based on who you are or where you came from. But that also means that if you meet those standards, you've earned your place here and the respect that comes with it. Maria's reputation had extended far beyond the Marine Corps. She had been invited to speak at military academies, professional conferences, and policy forums about the integration of women into combat specialties. Her message was consistently focused on capability and performance, rather than politics or social engineering. "We don't lower standards to accommodate anyone," she would tell audiences. "Instead, we eliminate artificial barriers that prevent qualified people from demonstrating their capabilities. The result is a stronger, more effective military that draws on the full range of available talent." The broader impact of Maria's breakthrough was evident throughout the military. Women now served in virtually all combat specialties, from infantry to special operations, and their performance had validated the policy changes that had opened these opportunities. The integration had not been without challenges, but the overall result was a more capable and diverse force. Alpha Squad itself had become something of a legend within the Marine Corps. The story of their rescue was taught in leadership courses as an example of small unit tactics and the importance of combined arms coordination. But for the Marines who had been there, it remained a deeply personal reminder of the courage and skill that had saved their lives. Corporal Thompson, the communications specialist who'd been saved by Maria's precision shooting during an earlier engagement, had remained in touch with her over the years. He had been promoted to Staff Sergeant and was serving as an instructor at the Marine Corps Communications Electronics School, where he frequently told his students about the sniper who had kept his unit alive through impossible shooting. "She made shots that day that shouldn't have been possible," Thompson would tell his classes. But more than that, she made decisions under pressure that saved 20 Marines. That's what we're trying to develop in all of you: the technical skills and the judgment to perform when it matters most. As Maria reflected on her journey from rejected applicant to chief instructor, she understood that her story was more than personal achievement. It was about institutional change, about the importance of recognizing talent regardless of its source, and about the courage required to challenge assumptions that limit human potential. The military she served in now was different from the one she had joined years earlier. It was more inclusive, more focused on capability than tradition, and more willing to adapt to changing realities. But the core values remained the same: honor, courage,
commitment, and the dedication to serve something larger than oneself. Maria's legacy would ultimately be measured not just by her own achievements, but by the opportunities she had created for others. Every woman who graduated from Scout Sniper School, every Marine woman who served in a combat specialty, and every military leader who made decisions based on capability rather than assumptions was in some way building on the foundation she had established during that desperate morning in the mountains of Afghanistan. The precision shots that had saved Alpha Squad had done more than rescue 20 Marines. They had changed the course of military history and opened doors that had been closed for too long. And in the end, that impact would prove to be Maria's most important contribution to the Corps she had served with such distinction. Maria Santos had been denied advanced training because of who she was, but when the moment came to prove what she could do, she had answered with precision, courage, and unwavering dedication to her fellow Marines. In doing so, she had not only saved 20 lives, but had also transformed an institution and created opportunities that would benefit countless others for generations to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.